Monolithic versus service-oriented architecture versus microservices architecture. Hello friends, today we will discuss the difference between monolithic architecture, service-oriented architecture, and microservices architecture. To understand these architectures, we have to go back into the history and see how each architecture evolved to replace the problems of previous architecture. We started with monolithic architecture. In monolithic architecture, we had one application. In one application, we packed all the code. We pushed more code. We have a mental block. Okay, it's good to work on one project file, solution file. It's difficult to work on different solution files. The results was we had a code, massive code blocks in one application. That was called monolith application. The problem with monolith applications was it was too huge. You had so many lines of code, and after some time the project file becomes slow. Another big problem with monolithic project was how to use common code. Suppose you're working some application. Suppose you are working in some company. Every application need to do some credit card processing. What you would do is you would take some library, you put it in your code, then you have to make changes in your code. You have to make sure that your library code should be in the language. If you're working on C sharp, that order processing, credit card processing library should be in C sharp. For Java, you had Java code. So you were stuck with the languages to use that, and it was not pretty. Then there was a versioning problem. Different client needed different versions, different functionality. So do you delegate this library maintenance to the project which is doing the application development, or you create another team to maintain these libraries? These were some decisions. Not to say some people were able to use interface programming and were able to use library management very well, but there were still problems of versioning, shipping the DLLs to the right people, versioning. You have to maintain so many clients. So then service-oriented architecture came into place. Why don't we create a service called credit card processing, and we will publish it to it using web API, and any client can use it. The client could be C sharp or Java. So we will publish an interface. Oh, these are the requirements we need. We need customer credit card and other information, and we'll provide you the processing results. And you can build your client applications in C sharp or Java. So another example, so these services were lightly coupled. Another problem that service-oriented architecture fixed was point-to-point integration. Before service-oriented architecture, most of the application has to use point-to-point integration, which was very complex. So with service-oriented architecture generally involves using a enterprise service bus. In enterprise services bus, you hook up your service, and your service could be either provider or consumer. Either it provides service, I sends messages to enterprise service bus, or it could be a consumer application which is reading messages from the service bus. Service oriented architecture solved complex integration problems. So service oriented architecture focus was on enterprise basis. What happened? So service-oriented architecture created some problems of monolithic applications. Monolithic applications were too huge. You have to deploy all or nothing. But still, service-oriented architecture involved using same databases, shared databases, and it could be supporting a lot of others. It may have dependencies on a lot of the services. Still, the deployment was difficult. So when I said, but why, what was the problem with deploy? So service-oriented architecture could be monolithic, or it could be lightly service. It could be one service which could be deployed by itself. So the biggest problems the big companies like Facebook, Uber faced with monolithic architecture is they have to deploy the huge application in a night. They needed all the programmers, all the support staff, more than hundreds, to be available on the same night. And if something failed, you have to roll back. So deployment was very problematic. And then another thing was like you, you have a application, e-commerce. So some of the you may need to scale the catalog part, and the order processing may not have that stress. So you need to scale some part of the application independently than other part of application. And here the microservices architecture came into place. In microservices architecture, you are more focused on building services based on specific application needs. Here you focused most of the development. You focus more control towards the individual teams. Microservices evolved from service-oriented architecture. So microservices solved this problem of complex deployment. Because microservices are small, independent, and not coupled to other services, you can deploy these services on the cloud. The microservices architecture is more geared towards the cloud. As cloud became more popular, microservices architecture also became very popular. There are similarities between microservices and service-oriented architecture. Both are services focused. You can develop service using any language, C#, Java. Make sure that applications are lightly coupled to each other. So what are the differences? The biggest difference is scope. Service-oriented architecture was based on the concept, oh, resources are expensive, we need to centralize processing. Service-oriented architecture was more about reuse of the code. Every application needs authentication, authorization, so why not centralize this code? Whereas microservices architecture was more about decentralization. The focus was more about developing individual applications like credit card processing, catalog. The idea was break a monolithic application into smaller applications, so you can anytime any application you can rewrite. If it is C#, you can write into Java. In monolithic, you have to write whole application or nothing. Microservices, since they are smaller pieces, you can rewrite faster. Again, and you can scale individual microservices independently. As I discussed, catalog may have more user load. You can deploy it on more services. Microservices were more container friendly, geared towards container, called Docker. Service oriented architecture may use Docker, may not use Docker. So second big difference between service-oriented architecture and microservices was most of the service-oriented architecture used enterprise bus. And this enterprise bus introduced one point failure, whereas microservices are independent of each other. Another big difference was service-oriented architecture was oriented architecture used shared databases, whereas microservices architecture, each microservices has its own database. If you are wondering, I have another video. I'll put the video inside the link. Do check out. So friends, today we discussed what is the difference between monolithic applications versus service-oriented architecture versus microservices architecture. So if you like this video, like it, share it, and subscribe to my channel for your regular updates. Also connect with me on LinkedIn and Twitter, especially LinkedIn if you like small summaries of the video. I will be posting a lot of small summaries of the video on LinkedIn. Thanks again.